Okay, we're still on the opening psukim on Aleph through Vav 1 through 6, and we had learned yesterday why the whole book is written in meshalim. We also learned that Mishlei is not a jumble of psukim. When you read Mishlei, a lot of times it just seems that there's no, each chapter doesn't have its own theme, that the themes are really just random, and it's just like little bite-sized pieces of musar, bite-sized pieces of ethical lessons. And the truth is, as we learned yesterday, that it does have, in fact, a purpose and a structure, and that there are 3 books to Mishlei. There are three purposes, as David Melch says, as Shlomo Melch says in Pasuk Beis, Ladas Chachma u'Musar lo havinim rebina. The first section is to know Chachma. The second is Musar, to understand the discipline and self-control. And then the third is lo havinim rebina, to understand the Torah. And in essence, what those 3 books are is how to prevent the Yetzer Hara from getting to a person, the evil inclination from controlling a person. The second is, when it gets you, how to release yourself from jail, which, by the way, is itself a very complicated thing. And the reason why it is so complicated is because at the end of the day, we don't often even recognize that we're in jail. The pasuk says, "Vayelchu achrei hevel vayibahelu," that we went after nothingness and we became like nothingness. In other words, you get caught up in the environment that you're in, and sometimes it's very difficult for a person to be able to see that they are actually stuck in something, and therefore to release ourselves from this prison, so to speak, of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and his clutches, is often very difficult. And that's the second section of Mishlei, of how to be able to do that successfully. And the third section is not only how to free yourself, but how to free yourself in the Torah way. Because very often, and we're going to speak about this more a little bit later, but very often the idea comes to a person that they need to extract themselves from something. But the way that they extract themselves is not necessarily according to the way of the Torah. I was having an incredible conversation with somebody on Shabbos. And what was fascinating about it is that the person was making absolute sense. And I'm not saying this in a pejorative, but if you were a guy, what they were saying makes absolute sense. If you didn't have a Torah and you didn't have a way to live by the Torah, so then what they were saying made perfect sense. It was logical, but it didn't fit in to Torah ideology. And Shlomo Melech, in the third section, wants us to be sure that we understand that when we deal with our issues and we deal with our personality, we deal with extricating ourselves from the Yetzer Hara, discipline, learning how to control ourselves, learning how to build ourselves, that it's all being done beruach HaTorah, and that we have to understand the value of Torah and the value of taking that Torah and using it as a measure of our lives. So then that's the third section. Okay. And that brings us to where we are now. Because yesterday we spoke about the opening words, who Shlomo was identifying himself, Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael, and then Lodas Chachma u'Musar Lohavin Imrei Vina. So the Vilna Gaon, who we're going to deal with twice today, the Vilna Gaon has an incredible way of understanding those opening lines. Very different than the way we understood it yesterday. The Vilna Gaon says, as do other commentaries, but that every single thing in this world has 4 components. You have chomer, which is the substance and the material. You have the poel, the agent, the thing that creates it or brings it about. You have the tsura, which is the form or the shape. And then you have the tachlis, which is the purpose. Says the Vilna Gaon that the way we understand that is that the substance is taken by the agent who shapes it. He gives it form in order for it to be able to achieve a purpose. That's the way we look at that run of words. That when we say chomer, poel, tsura, tachlis, that we take chomer by the poel, by the agent. He gives it tsura, he gives it form in order to be able to achieve a tachlis, a purpose. That's the first pasuk. Mishlei, Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael, lo da'as chachma umusar, lahavin imre bina. And let's take a look at that now. Mishlei is the chomer, it's the substance of the book, taken by the agent, by Shlomo HaMelech, the poel. He gives it form, which is to teach wisdom, discipline, and understanding, in order for it to achieve its tachlis, to be able to give practical application of these teachings, which is the third pasuk, lakachas musar haskel, tzedek mishpat umeshar. So according to the Gra, what is being outlined in the first two pasukim is the shape, the purpose of the entire book. That the book is Mishlei. That's the substance of the book. But it's taken by Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael in order to be able to give it form, again, which is discipline and understanding, and then to give it practical application. L'kachas musar haskel tzedek mishpat umeshar. Beautiful. The Malbim, though, has a very, very different way of seeing the opening of this book. And the Malbim says something which I think is incredible. The Malbim says that the reason why Shlomo Melech identified himself as Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael is because we know that there are three ways for a person to be able to grasp chachma, to grasp truth. The first way to grasp truth is through nevuah, through prophecy. What's prophecy? Prophecy is a vision of God given to us by God. I've mentioned before that a Navi can't walk into a room and say, oh, I know what you're thinking. Or say, invest in this stock because I know that it's going to go up. That's not a Navi. That's a clairvoyant, usually with a turban on their head and a glass bowl in front of them, and charges a lot of money, and mostly often a charlatan. That's not what a Navi is. A Navi is a person who has been given a vision of God, and a specific vision of God. God is very precise in the image that he gives a Navi, that the Navi then uses his own wisdom and understanding and his own spirit to be able to explain that and to put that forth. And that's the reason why there are no two prophets that prophesize in the same signon, in the same form, because a prophet, the prophecy was given to them by God. The explanation and the putting it over, that was something that they had to do themselves. And that's why a Navi has to be in a good mood. A Navi has to learn Torah. A Navi has to sing songs. A Navi has to be on a certain level in order to be able to be a Navi, because it's not about clairvoyance. It's not just about his ability to be able to see. It's about his spiritual ability to be able to receive the message from God. That's one way to receive, to be able to grasp the truth. Get it through Nevuah. All the Nevi'im that we had, what were they prophesying about? They were prophesying about God's truth. They were prophesying about living Jewish lives, about living Torah lives, about staying connected to God, about fixing our lives in order to be able to keep the Beis HaMikdash. They were speaking, they were talking within the context of truth, of emes. That's the first way that Shlomo HaMelech introduces himself. He says that these are the Mishlei Shlomo, who was a Navi, who was a person who had a wisdom that wasn't just a simple wisdom, but he was also a Navi, he was Zochet to Nevuah. But then he said, I want to give you my second credential of why I know the truth. Why am I a person who is worthy to listen to him? Because I'm giving you not my own conjecture, but I'm giving you truth. And the second is Ben David. What's Ben David? Ben David means I have a Masorah. I'm not making this up. I'm getting this from my father who got it from his father who got it from his father. I am getting this. I'm getting this through a chain of tradition. One of the most important things that we have going for us is the concept of Masorah. And that's the reason why when we see breaking with the Masorah, as intelligent as it sounds sometimes, but breaking with the Masorah is a critical breach, because that's the entire basis of our people. The entire basis of our people is Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. That was the last thing we learned, right? Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, U'Misorua Yeshua. That he got it from Sinai and he passed it on to Joshua. That word at the beginning of that Mishnah, Misorua, that forms the very basis of who we are. When Yudah Nasi, we spoke about this many months ago, that when Yehuda Nasi, when Judah the prince, wrote down the oral Torah, he took into consideration the concept of Masorah, because he wrote it in a bullet form way so that everybody could then know, we spoke about this the other day also, that everybody could then know where it ultimately comes from, and that you still need a teacher to teach it to you. Understanding that we live in a chain of tradition. We don't invent tradition. We don't start new things. We're lucky. That's the great advantage that we have the ability to be able to pass on what was in existence in previous generations. We don't need to innovate. We don't need to come up with something new. We need to faithfully transmit the Masorah. And that's the second thing that Shlomo Melech wanted us to know. First of all, I want you to know I'm a Navi. I got an inside scoop on MS. But I want you to know also importantly, I'm a Ben David. I have a Masorah. I got all of this from my father. By the way, that's one of the ways that we know the truth of Torah. One of the ways we know that Torah was given by God is the fact that 5 million people saw the Torah, heard the Torah at the same time. In every other religion, the Torah was given to one person. Yashka, Kimtaran Yashka, and he says, I have a dream. And I had a dream. God came to me and he made me your God. Shalom Aleichem, it's nice to meet you. I'm your God. It didn't happen that way with Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't come to the people and say, I had a dream. God came to me and he said that I'm now the leader. You guys got to bow down to me. When God revealed himself to the Jewish people, he revealed himself to every single Jew at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way. My Zayda doesn't lie to me. My Zayda told me a story of standing at the foot of Mount Sinai that he heard from his Zayda, that he heard from his Zayda, who heard it from his Zayda, who was standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. And that faithful transmission of that Masorah, that's how I know that this Torah is true. Because you take a Jew from Ethiopia, and you take a Jew from America, and you take a Jew from Eastern Europe, who have been separated from each other for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and yet they tell you exactly the same story. And the Jew from Ethiopia will tell it to you without any rabbinic overlay. He will tell it to you without Hebrew. He will tell it to you in Amharic, but he will tell you exactly the same story. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai u'Misorua Yoshua Yeshua l'Skenu Miskenu l'Ashkenaz Gadol. That's the way that we know this truth, because this truth came to us from generations before, which came to them from generations before that. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech wanted to impress on the reader of this. Because you can read this and you can say, why is this any different than some guy who sits all day long in a lotus position with his hands stretched out like this going, Why is it any different than that? Okay, it's a wisdom. It's smart stuff. You remember the way we talked in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, and that we said that the rabbis had to establish their credentials, that this was not just a bunch of interesting rabbis that said a bunch of interesting things. This was a Masorah from God himself. And that's why it began with Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, to understand that all of the ideas in Pirkei Avos were not just New Age philosophy, but that they came from deep roots of the sages, of the rabbis, of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and ultimately of God. And that's what Shlomo Melech has to do in this book also. When you want to give meshalim, you want to teach people how to live their lives, you have to know that it's coming from truth. It's not just something we're inventing. Because you want to invent it, I'll invent something different. I'll invent a system that's also a pretty intelligent system. It's a great thing. We'll call it Hare Krishna, and it's going to be fine. It's also going to be beautiful. Shkoyach, but it's not our Masorah. So what he wanted them to know is, why is this the truth? These meshalim are coming from Shlomo. They're coming from Nevuah. They're coming from Ben David. They're coming from Mesorah. What more do you need to say? Melech Yisrael. I was the king of the Jewish people. I lived a royal life. I've experienced everything. This is coming not from deprivation. This is coming not from assumption. This is coming not from theoretics, but that I lived through this. I'm the Melech Yisrael. I saw all of you and how you lived. I saw me and how I lived. I experimented. I experienced. I know this. These truths that I got through Nevuah and through Mesorah, I've lived them. You know, I think I said this. I got hired as a mashgiach in the yeshiva, mashgiach ruchni, starting in Elul, starting in September, and it's for American boys that could use a little bit of strengthening, and coming here after in their what they call now the gap year, and I've been teaching for coming close to 38 years, and I've been involved in chinuch for a long time, but I was wondering why I got the jobs. I realized all the Rabbeim there are younger than my children, and and I look like the venerable old man. If I had a longer beard, it'd be even better. So what is a venerable old man? Is my kids are in the process of making fun of me because on our family chat, on our WhatsApp, I just figured out last night how to take their statement and to put it in a little box and then to make a comment on it. Now, I know many of you are laughing at me also because you figured that out, but I figured it out and I was so proud of myself, and I can't even share some of the comments, the different things in creation that they compared me to, one being a vegetable. It was a great feat for me. Okay, but so what is a venerable old man? What does he have to share? Experience. Been there, done that, seen things. And just from that place, that alone is a place something to listen to. We learned this at the end of chapter 5, when we spoke about the concept towards the end of chapter 5, when we spoke about the different ages. Remember, we spoke about 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 and 100. And in 60, we said that was a zaken, ze kana chachma. You hit the age of 60, you're a smart person. Even if you can't do that shtick with the WhatsApp and you can't figure out how to make that thing talk for itself, it doesn't matter. You're a chacham, because ze kana chachma, because you lived life. And that's the third credential that Shlomo Melech gave. Says the Malbim, that's what Shlomo Melech is telling us. You want to know Chachma, Musar, Pasuk Beis, Pasuk Gimel, you want to know all of that stuff, that this is what's going to happen from this book. You're going to become wise and smart. Just understand what the source of it all is. Nevuah, Mesorah, and most importantly, life experience. Okay, beautiful. Let's move a little bit. Don't get nervous. We're not moving so fast or so far. But take a look at Pasuk Beis and take a look at Pasuk Gimel. If you remember yesterday, one of the things that I said was Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk Beis, Pasuk Gimel. Aleph was the credentials. Beis was what the purpose of this book is. Ladas Chachma, Musar, Lahavin, Imre Bina. Those are the three sections of the book. Lakachas Musar, Haskel, Tzedek, Umishpat, Umesharim. To take discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity. What exactly does that mean? What are you adding on to Pasuk Beis? Right? You see Pasuk Beis, purpose of the book is to get smart, to learn self-control, and to do that in Imre Bina, to do that in the way of the Torah. Great. Well, then what is the repetition in Pasuk Gimel? Lokachas Musar. We already said Musar in the second Pasuk. But if you look very carefully, and this, my friends, is a methodology that you're going to see me use. It's not mine, it's the Gruz, it's the Vilna Gaon's. But the methodology is that when you see a modifier to a word in one part of the pasuk, and a modifier to a similar word in the other part of the pasuk, you have to ask the question, why does this modify A and does this modify B? Look at it carefully. Pasuk Beis, lo das chachma musar. Pasuk Gimel, lo kachas musar haskel. So why is Pasuk Beis lo das to know and Pasuk Gimel lo kachas to take? Why is chachma musar being described in the terms of lo das? And why is musar haskel being described in the terms of lo kachas? Also, why we're repeating, if musar is said in Pasuk Beis, why does it need to be said in Pasuk Gimel? And if you look carefully in Pasuk Gimel and Pasuk Beis, it's actually said differently. In Pasuk Beis, it said chachma musar, wisdom and discipline. And in Pasuk Gimel, it says musar haskel. What's the difference between musar haskel, the word seichel, something intelligent, from the word chachma musar? What's being presented different there? Okay, everybody's got those questions. Those, by the way, are the types of questions that need to be asked in the book of Mishlei. Contrasting psukim to each other, contrasting in one, remember I told you at the very beginning, the first day, that there's a rhythm to Mishlei. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. L'kachas musar haskel, tzedek u'mishpat u'meshalim. L'seis l'psoim arma, l'nar das u'mirma. Yishma chacham v'yosef lekach, v'novon tachpulos yikne. You have it's two sides of almost every pasuk. Well, what are the two sides? What are they saying to us? What's the first side saying different than the second side? What's being added by the different words that are being used? He doesn't repeat words ever. So if you're not repeating the words, so then what is the new thing that's being said? Ladas chachma musar is one thing. Lakachas musar haskel is something completely different. Okay. Says the Gra, if you look at at pasuk Beis, ladas means to know. The pasuk Gimel is lakachas, is to take. There's a difference between knowing and taking. And taking is not just grabbing onto, but in order for something to be a lekach, in order for something to be taken, it has to be taken correctly. It's not enough that you put it in your hands or you put it in your mind, but it's got to be applied in a successful way. Musar haskel means that the lesson, the discipline, has to be successful discipline. In pasuk Beis, ladas, you have to understand what chachma and musar is. You have to understand wisdom. When you understand wisdom, then you'll understand what you have to be disciplined about. In pasuk Gimel, he's saying, and what you also need to know is lakachas, to take this inside of yourself, to assimilate this into yourself, to grab onto it and to take ownership of it, but it's got to be haskel. It's got to be successful. It says by David hamelech, "Vayi David lechol derachav maskil." David was successful in everything he did, because everything he did and knew made an impression on him, and he assimilated it. He took ownership on it. It became something that was a part and a parcel of him. It became a part of him. And if that's the case, the psukim are not repeating each other. It's saying, Ladas Chachmo Musar is what you theoretically need to know, and that's what the book is going to give you. But then the book is going to give you Lokachas Musar Haskel. You're going to internalize that Musar in a correct way. What does that mean, to internalize it in a correct way? The next three words in Pasuk Gimel: Tzedek, Mishpat, Meshalim. Tzedek means Lases Chesed Utzdaka in Kol Brios, says the Gra, that you have to be able to do righteousness and goodness and kindness with every single person. Tzedek means living in a way that you're always doing for yourself the right thing and for others the right thing, with kindness. But this is only Musar. It's only a knowledge, but it's not Musar Haskel. Because Musar Haskel is that sometimes you have to know that to do the right thing, you have to do what seems to be the wrong thing. Sometimes, in order to uproot evil, you have to display anger. Sometimes it's necessary to deal with something, not to be angry, but to deal with something with anger. Shelafamim tzarech ha'adam lemidas hakas, says the Gross. Sometimes you need the attribute of kas, of anger. Shehu mishpat, which really is mishpat. So tzedek is great, but tzedek sometimes needs to be tempered with mishpat. It needs to be tempered. There needs to be boundaries. You can't just always do the thing of kindness. Sometimes you need to be surrounded by boundaries. And that's being Adam la'atzmo. That's between a person and themselves. Because la'olam yargiz, a person has to cause a battle in themselves between their good inclination and their evil inclination. And if that's true inside of myself, then I need anger in the sense that I need to be passionate about things. I need to look at myself and to get upset in the sense that I don't like what's happening inside of myself. It can't just be all tzedek and all forgiving and everything is great. I'm okay, you're okay, everything's okay. It's not always okay. And that's not only true in a person to themselves, but after Shar b'nei Adam, says the Gra, even to other people. Tzarech l'midas hakas. Let's say din l'rishoyim, sometimes to give justice to the wicked, sometimes to be able to put the wicked in their place, like Pinchas, it's necessary. But every person in accordance with what the context of the situation is. And sometimes you got to go the opposite direction. Sometimes din is necessary, but you got to look at it and you got to say there's got to be some balance here. There needs to be meshalim. I need to be a little bit softer here. And softness is going to get me the whole way. Softness is going to be the thing that's going to get me the win here. Yes, you have to do the right thing. There has to be tzedek, but tzedek has to be tempered with mishpat and mesharim. Sometimes a little stronger, sometimes a little less. And that's what Musar Haskel is. Musar Haskel is not just discipline. I saw what discipline does to a person. I had a fellow in my yeshiva when I was learning here in Eretz Yisrael who got very into a sefer called, well, it doesn't make a difference what the sefer was because it's not the sefer's fault, but he got into a certain Musar sefer. And this guy would write down every night all the things he did wrong. Never said a word to himself about all the things he did right. He was the most beautiful human being. Everybody loved this guy. He was a Talmud Chacham at a young age. I recently got a sefer from his kids that he wrote before he died. He died, unfortunately, got sick and he died. But he drove himself crazy to the extent that he impaired himself. He hurt himself because all he could see in himself was the negative. He was the most disciplined person in the yeshiva, the most disciplined person. But that person, that discipline was not Musar Haskel. It was just Musar. It wasn't successful Musar. It didn't have tzedek u'mishpat u'meisharim. And that's what Shlomo Melech wants us to understand, says the Gra, when in the Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk Beis, Pasuk Gimel, when he's laying out for us where we're going, where we're going to be spending the next couple of years on, where we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on the Das, Chachma, Musar, Ulahavinim Rebina. But don't make a mistake. It's not just about discipline and it's not just about ripping ourselves apart, but it's about Musar Haskel. It's got to be done with success by applying mishpat and mesharim to the tzedek, always doing the right thing, but sometimes a little tighter and sometimes a little more relaxed, sometimes with mishpat and sometimes with mesharim. And that's what we walk into the book with. The next thing that we're going to see, not today, of course, but the next thing we're going to see are some of the people that Shlomo Melech is going to introduce us to. The Pesi, the fool, the Nar, the child, the Chacham, the Navon. Who are those people? Why are we talking to each one of them differently? We'll see that next week. Tomorrow's Pasha. Everybody should have an amazing, beautiful, awesome, wonderful day. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will see everyone tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Have a great day.
Have a great
Thank
day,
you
everyone.
very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.